You're making it worse!
I said, get him out of here. He's just the janitor. Mom, I can't breathe. Make it stop. The lobby felt too bright, too loud, every polished surface reflecting panic as security tightened their circle and authority failed in real time. Then, the man in the work uniform crouched anyway and lifted a balloon to his lips, calm as if none of them were watching. No one in that room understood yet that this small, ignored moment was about to upend power itself. This story isn't about balloons or titles. It's about who shows up when fear takes over. Before I show you the exact moment when control slips from the highest floor to the lowest one, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The janitor didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice or explain himself. He just stayed where he was, steady, grounded, letting the air fill the thin rubber with slow, even breaths while the girls' sobs hitched and echoed. Around them, shoes shifted, radios crackled, and impatience sharpened into something close to panic. Above it all, behind glass and steel, someone powerful was watching, convinced this was spiraling toward disaster. He'd been scrubbing a spill near the service corridor when the noise started. High, fractured, the kind of sound that set every nerve on edge. He recognized it instantly, the way a parent recognizes a cry in a crowded room. His cart was still there, mop dripping, when he moved. No permission, no announcement, just instinct. Evan Calder was used to being invisible in places like this. Night shifts had taught him how to exist between footsteps, how to pass through gleaming halls without leaving a mark. People saw the uniform, the cart, the bowed head. They didn't see the way his eyes tracked exits or how his shoulders stayed loose, ready. They didn't hear the counting under his breath as he knelt, matching the rhythm of his breathing, to the girl's gasps. Security tried again. "Sir, you need to—" He shook his head once, gentle but final, and kept working the balloon, twisting it slowly. The squeak cut through the noise, something simple and strange enough to interrupt the spiral. The girl's eyes flicked to it despite herself. Her hands clenched, then loosened. Evan felt the familiar pull in his chest, the memory of another small body shaking against him years ago, another voice breaking on fear. His son's. Noah had been 6 then, terrified of hospitals after everything they'd lost. Evan had learned the hard way how fragile calm could be and how powerful. "Look," he murmured, voice low, meant only for her. "It's okay, watch this." He didn't rush. He never rushed. The balloon became a crooked dog, then something else entirely, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that her breathing slowed enough to follow his hand. Inhale, exhale. Again. Around them, impatience softened into confusion. Phones lowered. Someone whispered. From the upper level, a woman pressed her hand to the glass, her reflection fractured across the city beyond. This wasn't how crises were supposed to be handled. There were protocols, experts, money. Evan felt the shift before he saw it, the room settling, the girl's shoulders dropping an inch. Relief crept in, cautious, almost afraid to believe itself. He stayed where he was, grounded, knowing the moment wasn't over yet. It never ended all at once. Inside, something steadied too. He wasn't thinking about his past or the life he'd stepped away from. He was thinking about getting home before dawn, about Noah's lunch packed crooked this morning, about how some things, fear, love, responsibility, ignored titles completely. The balloon slipped from his fingers and rolled across the marble floor. No one stopped it. For the first time since the panic began, the room let out a breath together. And in that quiet, the janitor remained, kneeling, exactly where power never thought to look. The quiet didn't last long. It never did in places built on momentum and money. As the girl was guided gently into her mother's arms, the space filled again with motion. Security radios murmuring, staff whispering, the polished machine restarting itself. Evan stayed kneeling a second longer, making sure her breathing held, then slowly stood. His knees complained. Marble always did that. Someone cleared their throat behind him. He didn't turn right away. He'd learned not to react too fast when attention finally landed. It usually meant trouble. "Sir," the security lead said, voice tight but no longer sharp, "we're going to need a statement." He nodded once. "Sure." Around them, people watched with a different kind of interest now, not suspicion exactly, something closer to recalibration. He felt it in the way eyes lingered on his hands, still holding a deflated balloon, on the janitor's cart abandoned nearby, like evidence of a life paused mid-task. From the upper floor, Mara Whitcomb lowered her hand from the glass. Her daughter clung to her, small fingers twisted into silk, breath still uneven but no longer breaking. The expert she'd summoned stood uselessly behind her, tablets dim, credentials suddenly irrelevant. She kept her gaze on the man below, trying to reconcile the calm she'd witnessed with the role he occupied. Evan pushed his cart toward the service corridor when no one stopped him. The wheels squeaked, familiar, grounding. He liked that sound. It meant forward motion. He liked routines for the same reason. They held things together. The corridor swallowed him in cooler air and harsher light. The building sounded different here, pipes ticking, vents humming, the low thrum of systems that never slept. He took a breath, longer than necessary, and felt the adrenaline fade. Only then did his hands start to shake. He leaned the mop against the wall and flexed his fingers. He hated that part, the after. The body remembering even when the mind had stayed steady. He closed his eyes briefly and pictured Noah's face this morning. Cereal bowl half finished, shoes mismatched again. He'd laughed then, kissed his son's hair, promised he'd be home before sunrise. He always made that promise. Footsteps echoed, not rushed, intentional. You didn't have to do that. He opened his eyes. Mara stood a few feet away, posture perfect despite the strain around her mouth, no entourage, no glass between them now. He shrugged lightly. Kid needed help. That situation could have escalated, she said. You put yourself at risk. He met her gaze, not challenging, not deferential either, just honest. She was already at risk. Silence stretched. Somewhere, a machine clicked on. She studied him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Less certainty, more curiosity. "What's your name?" she asked. He gave her his first name, only. It felt like enough. She nodded. "Thank you for what you did." He accepted the words the way he'd learned to accept apologies, without grasping, without resentment. She did most of the work. A faint, confused smile flickered across her face. It vanished as quickly as it came. "If there's anything, I'm good," he said gently. "Just doing my job." Her eyes dropped to the cart and the uniform, the scuffed boots. When she looked back up, the distance between worlds felt thinner, more fragile. She left then, pulled back into her orbit of power and urgency. Evan returned to his cart. There was still a spill to clean, always was. As he worked, a few employees passed by. One murmured thanks. Another offered a nod that held more respect than he was used to. It didn't change his pace. Validation was nice, but it didn't pay rent or pack lunches. Still, something had shifted. He felt it like a draft through a closed door. When his shift ended, he clocked, out and stepped into the early morning chill. The city was quieter, softer around the edges. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering, then typed a quick message home. On the train, exhaustion settled in deep. He closed his eyes, unaware of the conversations already unfolding upstairs, of how his calm had disrupted assumptions that would not easily reform. If you're still with this story, subscribe now. You won't want to miss how this moment keeps unfolding. The train rocked gently, carrying him back toward the life he'd built piece by piece, unaware that the building he'd just cleaned was already learning his name. The train slowed with a familiar groan, metal on metal, and he opened his eyes just long enough to see his stop slide past the fogged window. Morning light crept in low and pale, touching faces that looked as tired as he felt. He stood, steadying himself on the pole, and stepped onto the platform with the rest of the quiet crowd. Home smelled like coffee and laundry detergent. Noah was still asleep on the couch, blanket kicked off, cartoon paused mid-frame. Evan set his bag down without a sound and draped the blanket back over his son's shoulders. The kid stirred, mumbled something unintelligible, then settled again. That was enough. He moved to the kitchen, rinsed his mug, and leaned against the counter, letting the silence do its work. His phone buzzed once. Then again. He frowned. No one texted him this early unless something was wrong. A message preview flashed across the screen from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Evan? This is Lila's aide." He didn't open it. Not yet. He set the phone face down and stared out the small window above the sink, watching the city wake up. He'd learned the hard way that some doors, once cracked open, never quite closed again. By the time he woke Noah for school, the phone had buzzed 3 more times. He ignored them all. Breakfast happened. Shoes were found. A permission slip was signed, with a pen that barely worked. At the door, Noah hugged him hard, arms tight around his waist. "You okay?" his son asked, looking up with that too-old seriousness kids carried when they'd seen loss early. "Yeah," he said, meaning it. "Just tired." After the door closed behind Noah, Evan finally picked up the phone. He read the messages slowly. No demands, no threats, just thanks, questions, a request to talk when convenient. The words were careful, respectful. That almost made it worse. He typed a brief response. "I'm glad she's okay. I'm at work nights, hard to talk much." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then stopped, then appeared again. Finally, "Understood. If you're willing, Ms. Whitcomb would like to speak with you. No pressure." He exhaled and slipped the phone into his pocket. Pressure didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waited. That afternoon, miles away and several floors above the ground, Mara sat at a long glass table while her team replayed footage from the lobby. She watched without speaking, eyes fixed on the moment the janitor stepped into frame. The way he moved bothered her, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. "Who is he?" she asked. A pause. Her head of security cleared his throat. "Maintenance, night shift, no prior incidents." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, longer this time. "We checked around. One of the nurses from the private clinic recognized him. Said he used to work pediatric trauma cases. Years ago. Left suddenly." Mara's fingers stilled on the table. Why would someone like that be cleaning floors? No one answered, because there was no clean explanation that fit inside a spreadsheet. Back in the building, whispers traveled faster than memos. A receptionist leaned toward a coworker and said she'd heard the janitor used to calm kids during disasters. A security guard mentioned the way he'd taken control without taking over. By the end of the day, The story had grown edges and weight. When Evan arrived for his shift that night, the lobby felt different. People looked up, some smiled. One man nodded with something like gratitude. He kept his eyes forward and pushed his cart where it needed to go. Fame, even the smallest kind, had a way of complicating things. In the service elevator, a young intern hesitated before speaking. "Hey, I just wanted to say, my little sister has panic attacks. Seeing you yesterday, it helped." He swallowed and nodded. "I'm glad." The doors opened. The building hummed on. Evan stepped back into the margins, exactly where he'd always worked best, unaware that the questions forming around him were already reshaping expectations he'd never asked to carry again. The elevator doors slid shut behind him, sealing in the low hum of cables and the faint smell of disinfectant. He adjusted his grip on the cart handle and let the building carry him upward, back into the quiet arteries, where no one lingered. Above, conversations multiplied. Around him, the structure breathed. He felt eyes on him when the doors opened. Not many, just enough to notice. Two facilities staff paused mid-sentence. A security guard gave a half nod, uncertain, like he wasn't sure which rule applied anymore. Evan returned it and moved on, the wheels of the cart rattling softly over a seam in the floor. Work had a way of resetting things. Spills didn't care about reputations. Trash didn't ask questions. He focused on the familiar sequence: gloves on, caution sign out, slow, deliberate passes with the mop. The building's nighttime personality settled in. Lights dimmed, footsteps spaced farther apart. This was the version he understood. Still, something tugged at the edge of his awareness. Doors opened more often than usual. People lingered a second longer before moving on. Once, he caught his reflection in a polished wall panel and barely recognized the way he held himself. Shoulders squared, alert but calm. Old habits surfaced when needed, then refused to fully sink again. On the executive floor, Mara stood alone in her office, jacket draped over the chair she never used. The city sprawled beneath her in lights and motion, but her focus stayed inward. Her daughter slept in the adjacent room, finally exhausted, breath even. That image wouldn't leave her. The moment fear had cracked through all her safeguards, she replayed it again. The janitor kneeling, the crowd receding without being told, control without command. It unsettled her more than failure ever had. Power, she'd learned, was supposed to look like certainty. A soft knock broke her thoughts. "We confirmed it," her aide said quietly. "He resigned years ago, no complaints, no scandal, just walked away." "Why?" Mara asked. The aide shook her head. Personal loss, his wife. After that, he took custody of his son and disappeared from the field. Mara looked back toward the door, separating her from her sleeping child. Something shifted, slow and uncomfortable. She dismissed the aide and stood there longer than she meant to, listening to the building settle around her. Down below, Evan finished mopping and stowed his supplies. He checked the time, still hours to go. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't look. Not yet. He'd learned when to hold still. In the break room, two co-workers fell silent when he entered. Then one cleared his throat. "Hey, man, that thing yesterday, you okay?" "Yeah," he said, "just another shift." They exchanged glances, unsure whether to push. He poured coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the bitterness ground him. The room smelled like burnt beans and old paint. It felt safe. When he stepped back into the corridor, an alarm chirped briefly somewhere above, then cut off. Nothing serious, but his body reacted anyway, attention sharpening, senses widening. He paused, listening. Pipes, vents, the building's pulse. Moments later, a frantic voice echoed faintly from the stairwell. Too high, too fast. Not the same, but close enough. He set the cart aside without thinking and moved toward the sound. Steps measured. Fear had patterns. So did buildings. At the stairwell door he stopped, hand hovering over the handle. The voice continued, muffled but urgent. A woman this time, not a child. He took a breath, steadying himself, aware that each step forward pulled him further from anonymity. Above him, on the executive floor, Mara's phone lit up with a security alert. Minor disturbance. Stairwell B contained. She stared at the screen, then at the city beyond the glass. For the first time that day, she hesitated before delegating. Somewhere below, a man she didn't understand yet was already moving. Evan opened the door and stepped inside, the sound swelling around him. Whatever was happening, the building had shifted again, and so had his place within it. The stairwell smelled like dust and old concrete, the air cooler and tighter than the open corridors. The sound hit him fully now. Ragged breathing, a voice caught between anger and fear, footsteps pacing too fast for the narrow space. Evan closed the door behind him softly, letting it latch without a bang. Small things mattered in moments like this. A woman stood halfway down the landing, one hand gripping the rail hard enough to whiten her knuckles, the other pressed to her chest. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, darting from corner to corner as if the walls were closing in. A dropped tablet lay near her feet, screen cracked, forgotten. "It's not working," she said to no one in particular. They said it would work. Evan stopped several steps away, keeping distance. He angled his body slightly, not head-on, non-threatening. He let a few seconds pass before speaking. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're okay. You're not in trouble." Her head snapped toward him. "Who are you?" "Maintenance," he replied easily, as if that explained everything. "In this building, sometimes it did. I heard you, thought I'd check." "I can't." Her breath hitched, words tumbling over each other. "I can't get air. I'm going to pass out." "You're breathing," he said, steady. "Too fast, but you are." She shook her head, panic surging again. He watched it crest, the familiar wave, and timed his next words carefully. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked. "Just one?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Put your feet flat, feel the ground." He waited until she did. "Good, now look at that crack in the wall there. See it?" Her gaze followed despite herself. "Count the lines branching off it," he continued. "Not fast, just count." Her breathing stuttered, then slowed a fraction. Evan stayed where he was, voice even, letting the stairwell hold the rest of the noise. This wasn't about fixing, it was about writing it out. Upstairs, security monitors flickered with camera feeds. A guard leaned closer to the screen showing Stairwell B. "He's in there again," he murmured. Mara heard it from across the room. "Who?" "The janitor." She stood without thinking, heels clicking once before she stopped herself. The screen showed a familiar posture, slight crouch, hands loose at his sides, attention fully on the woman in front of him. No crowd, no spectacle, just quiet competence. Minutes passed. The woman sank onto the step, shaking but present. Evan lowered himself onto the opposite stair, keeping space. He guided her breathing with his own, exaggerating the rise and fall of his shoulders. When she finally looked at him again, there were tears in her eyes, but clarity too. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause—" "You didn't," he said gently. "Bodies do what they do sometimes." A radio crackled outside the door. "Stairwell B, security here. Situation under control." Evan glanced toward the sound, then back to the woman. "We're okay," he called out. "Give us a minute." There was a pause. Then, "Copy." From the monitor room, Mara exhaled slowly. This wasn't luck. It couldn't be. She recognized precision when she saw it, even if she didn't understand the source yet. When the woman was steady enough, Evans stood and offered his hand, careful not to rush. She took it, gripping like a lifeline. He walked her out, past the watching guard who stepped aside without comment. As they parted, she looked back at him. "Thank you," she said, voice thick. "I don't even know your name." He smiled faintly. "That's okay." Later, alone again with his cart, Evan felt the weight of it settle in. The eyes, the whispers, the sense that something was tipping whether he wanted it to or not. He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the wall, grounding himself. Moments like these reminded him why he'd walked away once, and why he kept finding him anyway. If this story's pulling you in, make sure you're subscribed, because what's coming next forces the truth into the open in ways none of them can ignore. He picked up the cart handle and moved on, unaware that upstairs decisions were already being reshaped around the man who kept calming storms without asking permission. The stairwell door closed behind him with a soft click, sealing off the echo of the woman's retreating footsteps. Evan stood there for a moment longer, palm flat against the cool metal, letting the building settle back into itself. His pulse slowed in stages, like a tide pulling away from shore. He exhaled and turned toward his cart. The corridor felt narrower than it had an hour ago, not physically, socially. He could feel attention pooling in quiet corners, the way it did after something went wrong, or right, in a place that preferred predictability. He pushed the cart forward, wheels humming, and resumed his route. On the executive floor, the atmosphere had shifted from alarm to analysis. Screens replayed footage without sound. Angles were paused, rewound, slowed. Mara watched from behind folded arms, her posture rigid but her eyes sharp. She didn't miss the way he'd positioned himself, how he'd spoken less as the panic eased. It wasn't charisma. It was calibration. "Who authorized him to intervene?" someone asked. "No one," the security lead replied, but there was no protocol violation. Mara's gaze stayed fixed on the screen. There was a protocol gap. Silence followed. She straightened, decision settling in. "I want him brought up, not interrogated, invited." Down below, Evan felt his phone vibrate again. He ignored it, focusing instead on a scuffed patch of floor near the elevators. He scrubbed until the mark faded, then a little longer. Control where he could get it. When the call finally came over his radio, it was phrased carefully. "Maintenance. We need you on. 32. He paused. 32 was executive. He'd been there only a handful of times, always after hours, always invisible. "Copy," he said, voice steady. The elevator ride-up felt longer than usual. Each floor chimed softly, counting down distance he hadn't planned to cross. He adjusted his gloves, then removed them, tucking them into his pocket. It felt important suddenly to meet whatever waited without armor. The doors opened onto quiet luxury, carpet thick enough to swallow sound, art chosen to signal taste, not joy. A receptionist gestured him through without comment. Mara stood near the window, city lights framing her silhouette. She turned as he entered, studying him openly now, not as staff, as a variable. "Thank you for coming," she said. He nodded. "You asked." "I did." She gestured to a chair. He didn't sit until she did. Old instincts rising uninvited. "I won't waste your time," she continued. "What you did yesterday, and tonight, it wasn't improvisation." He met her gaze, weighing silence against truth. "It was experience." With children, she said, not a question. Yes. She absorbed that, fingers tapping once against the glass. My daughter trusts very few people. She trusted you. That's hers, he said quietly. Not mine. A corner of her composure cracked. You walked away from a career most people would kill for. Why? The question landed heavier than she intended. He felt it anyway, a pressure behind the ribs. He chose his words with care. Because I couldn't be everywhere, he said, and the one place I needed to be most wasn't compatible with that life. She nodded slowly. Your son. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. They stood there, two people from opposite ends of the building, united by the same truth neither had planned on revealing. Outside, sirens wailed distantly, then faded. I want to make sure this doesn't happen. Again, she said, not like that. He considered her. You can't prevent fear, you can only meet it better. Another silence. This one held respect. When he left the office, the corridor felt different again, not narrower, wider, as if the building itself had acknowledged him. He returned to his cart, finished his shift, and clocked out as dawn brushed the skyline. At home, Noah was already awake, cereal spilled, homework forgotten. Evan smiled and joined him at the table, grounding himself where it mattered most. Upstairs in a tower of glass, a powerful woman stared at a city she suddenly understood a little less, and a janitor she understood far more than she expected. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, catching the edge of a chipped mug and the crumbs Noah never seemed to notice. Evan leaned back in his chair, arms folded, listening to his son talk about a science quiz with the kind of seriousness adults reserved for boardrooms. He nodded in the right places, smiled when prompted, and let the normalcy steady him. At school drop-off, Noah hesitated before getting out. You're picking me up today, right? Wouldn't miss it, he said, tapping the steering wheel once. The boy grinned and ran off, backpack bouncing. Evan waited until the doors closed before pulling away, exhaling slowly. By the time he reached the building that night, the questions had ripened. Not loud, not direct. Subtle looks. A pause before someone spoke. He pushed through the service entrance and felt the familiar hum wrap around him. Work first. Everything else later. Halfway through his route, a woman from HR approached, smiled professionally, but eyes were uncertain. We're doing a facilities audit, she said. Just routine. Might ask you a few questions later. He nodded. Okay. It wasn't okay, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because attention had a way of rewriting intentions. He finished his tasks methodically, grounding himself in routine. Mop, rinse, repeat. Upstairs, Mara convened a small meeting. No titles announced, no assistants present, just people she trusted to think, not posture. The footage from the stairwell played again, silent. She watched the moment the janitor stepped back, gave space, let the woman reclaim herself. He never takes control, she said. He gives it back. That's not standard training, someone replied. No, she agreed. It's better. A pause. Then, what do you want to do? She didn't answer right away. Power had always meant leverage to her. Now it felt like responsibility pressing in a new direction. I want to learn, she said finally. And I want this building safer, not by protocol alone. Down below, Evan found a folded note on his cart. No logo, just handwriting. Thank you. She's okay today. He stared at it longer than necessary, then tucked it into his pocket. In the break room, the intern from before sat, quietly. Hey, she said. People are talking. He raised an eyebrow. They say you used to be someone else, she continued. Before. He considered correcting her, then didn't. "I'm still me." She nodded, accepting that more easily than most. Later, security stopped him near the elevators. The guard shifted, uncomfortable. "Boss wants to know if you'd be willing to help us put together something. Training for panic situations." Evan leaned against the wall, thinking of Noah's tight hug that morning, of Lila's breathing slowing, of the woman in the stairwell finding her footing again. "I don't do presentations," he said, "but I can show you what works." "That'd be great," the guard said, relief obvious. The night moved on. Tasks completed. Floors shined. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, Evan realized the building no longer felt like a place he passed through. It felt aware. At pickup, Noah bounded into the car. "You look tired," he said. "Good tired," Evan replied. As they drove home, his phone buzzed once more. A single message from an unknown number. "Thank you for trusting us with this." He didn't respond, not yet. From a tower of glass, Mara watched the city shift colors, dawn bleeding in. She understood now that the calm she sought couldn't be bought or commanded. It had to be learned, and sometimes followed. Below, in a quiet car headed home, a single father drove forward, unaware that the space between power and purpose had narrowed, and that soon it would demand more than silence. The conference room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and new carpet, a space designed to feel neutral while quietly asserting control. Evan stood just inside the doorway, hands loose at his sides, eyes taking in the layout without effort. Long table, glass walls, chairs arranged to face the screen, not each other. He stayed standing. Across from him, security officers filled a row of seats. A few facilities managers lingered near the back, uncertain whether they belonged. Mara entered last. No announcement, no rush. She took a seat off to the side instead of the head of the table. That didn't go unnoticed. "This isn't mandatory," she said, looking at Evan, not the room. "You can leave at any time." He nodded. "I won't." The screen stayed dark. No slides, no agenda. Evan stepped forward a half pace, grounding himself the way he always did before stepping into someone else's fear. He didn't lecture, he didn't perform. He asked a simple question instead. "What do you do when someone panics?" Answers came hesitantly at first. "Call it in, clear the area, restrain if necessary." He listened, absorbing the rhythm of their responses, the assumptions underneath. "Those things protect systems," he said calmly. "Not people." He demonstrated instead. How to lower a voice, how to angle a body, how to let silence work without rushing to fill it. He had one officer hyperventilate on purpose, then guided him back with nothing but pacing and presence. The room shifted as understanding replaced theory. Mara watched, arms folded loosely now, something like respect settling into her posture. This wasn't charity. This was competence being shared, freely, without ego. When it ended, no one clapped. They didn't need to. The quiet held something heavier, recognition. "Thank you," one of the managers said finally. This should have been standard." Evan shrugged lightly. "People aren't standard." As the room emptied, Mara lingered. "You could formalize this," she said. "Consult, train, on your terms." He met her gaze. "I've got a kid to pick up." She smiled then, small but real. "So do I." They walked out together, side by side but not aligned by hierarchy. Just two parents navigating responsibility from different angles. In the hall, a few employees paused, surprised to see them together. Evan felt the weight of their attention, the shift in how space opened around him. Later that night, back in the service corridor, he leaned on his cart and let the fatigue wash through him. The building sounded different now, not louder, just more aware. He pulled the folded note from his pocket again, smoothing the crease with his thumb. At home, Noah sprawled on the floor doing homework, tongue poking out in concentration. Evan dropped his bag and sat beside him, helping with fractions, listening to complaints about group projects. Life, grounding and imperfect. As Noah drifted off to sleep later, Evan sat on the edge of the bed longer than usual. He thought about how close he'd come to being pulled back into a world that once took everything from him, and how this time the choice felt different. If you're still here and feeling this shift, make sure you're subscribed, because the next turn forces a public reckoning neither side can avoid. The next morning, an email circulated quietly through the building. New training protocols, acknowledgements, no names highlighted, except one line at the bottom, understated but impossible to miss. Special thanks to our facilities colleague for invaluable guidance. Evan read it on his phone during a break, then locked the screen and went back to work. The floors still needed cleaning, but the distance between who he was and how the world saw him had narrowed again. This time, with witnesses. The lobby felt different the next evening, not louder, not quieter, just charged in a way Evan couldn't quite name. People moved with purpose, but their eyes tracked more than their feet now. He clocked in, rolled his cart forward, and felt the subtle shift as conversations dipped when he passed, then resumed in altered tones. A week ago, no one would have noticed him crossing the marble. Now, a receptionist offered a small smile. A security guard held the elevator without being asked. None of it felt celebratory. It felt like recalibration, the slow grinding of a system realizing it had misjudged one of its constants. He kept his head down and worked. Midway through the evening, the building hosted a donor event. Soft lighting, catered trays, people in tailored clothes filling the upper floors. Evan avoided those areas when he could. Tonight, he couldn't. A spill near the main stairwell had already drawn attention. As he set out the caution sign, voices floated down from above. Laughter, then tension. A young woman froze halfway down the stairs, eyes glassy, breath catching. Not a full spiral, not yet. People hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or give space. Evan didn't rush. He positioned himself where she could see him without feeling cornered. "Hey," he said quietly. "You want to step over here with me?" She nodded, barely. He guided her aside, keeping his voice low, movements minimal. A few breaths later, the moment passed. Relief rippled outward, subtle but unmistakable. Someone clapped softly, then stopped, embarrassed. From the balcony above, Mara watched it unfold. Not as an anomaly this time, but as confirmation. The building hadn't needed an announcement. It had learned. After the event, as guests filtered out, a group lingered near the elevators. One of the donors, a man used to being heard, gestured toward Evan. "Isn't that the guy?" "Yes," someone replied. "Facilities." "No," another corrected. "He's the one who helped Whitcomb's kid." The words carried. Evan pretended not to hear, scrubbing the floor a little harder than necessary. Later, in the staff corridor, a junior manager approached him, hands tucked into pockets. "Hey, just wanted to say, thanks for everything." Evan nodded. "You're welcome. You know," the manager continued, "people talk about leadership like it's loud, but what you do, it sticks." Evan met his eyes. "Then pass it on." By midnight, the building settled. The donors were gone. The lights dimmed. Routine reclaimed its place. Evan finished his route and headed for the locker room, muscles aching in that good, honest way. At home, Noah was waiting up, homework done, eyes heavy. "You're late," he said, not accusing, just noting. "Yeah," Evan replied, sitting beside him. "Big day." Noah studied him. "You helped more people again, didn't you?" Evan smiled faintly. "Maybe." His son nodded, satisfied. "That's good." The next morning, the building's internal feed lit up with a short video. No dramatic editing. Just a compilation of training moments, quiet interventions, people helping people. It spread faster than anyone expected. Comments followed. Gratitude, reflection. A few uncomfortable admissions. Mara read them all. By evening, a memo went out. New initiatives, recognition for overlooked roles. An open forum scheduled in the main atrium. Employees and leadership together. No hierarchy, no podium. Evan read the message twice, then once more. He folded his phone into his pocket and leaned against the service wall, feeling the weight of the moment settle. This was bigger now. Public. Unavoidable. He closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself the way he always did before stepping forward. He thought of Noah, of Lila, of the woman in the stairwell, of a life he'd left behind and the one he was still building. When he opened his eyes, the building hummed around him, no longer just a place of work, but a space on the edge of change. And for the first time, Evan knew he wouldn't be able to stay invisible much longer. The atrium looked larger when it was full of people who usually passed through it without stopping. Chairs had been arranged in loose rows, not facing a stage but each other, breaking the usual geometry of authority. The polished floor reflected faces instead of shoes. Evan stood near a column at the edge, hands loosely folded, feeling the low buzz of anticipation ripple through the space. He hadn't planned to stand out. He never did. But the open forum had drawn eyes the moment he stepped in, like the room itself recognized a shift it couldn't undo. Conversation softened as he passed. A few people nodded. One offered a quiet thank you. He acknowledged them all with the same calm, keeping his breathing steady. Mara entered without ceremony, no entourage, no elevated platform. She took a chair in the second row, deliberately not the first. That choice alone sent a murmur through the crowd. Evan noticed, filed it away without judgment. The forum began with no speech, no introduction, just silence long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then Mara stood, not to command but to confess. "I built this company on control," she said, voice carrying without strain. "On systems that assumed fear could be managed if it was contained. I was wrong." The words landed heavier than applause ever could. Evan felt something tighten in his chest, not pride, not vindication. "Recognition," she continued, speaking of her daughter's panic, of the helplessness that money hadn't touched, of watching from above as someone she'd never noticed changed everything without asking permission. She didn't name him at first. She didn't need to. Everyone knew. "When power fails," she said, eyes scanning the room, "we find out who we've been ignoring." All heads turned toward the column where Evan stood. He didn't move. He let the moment come to him instead of stepping into it. The silence stretched again, expectant. Mara looked at him then, not as a CEO addressing staff, but as a mother addressing someone who had held her child's fear without judgment. "Would you be willing," she asked carefully, "to share what you see from where you stand?" The question was an invitation, not a demand. Evan felt the weight of it settle. He thought of Noah's hand in his that morning, of the promise he'd made, again, to be home before dark. He stepped forward. He didn't take the center. He stood where the light from the glass ceiling softened, voice steady but unamplified. "I don't see power," he said. "I see people moving too fast to notice each other." A few breaths passed. He went on, choosing each word with care. He spoke about fear as a language, about how it didn't respond to volume or authority, only presence. About how the building itself had changed once people stopped asking who was allowed to help and started asking who could. He didn't mention his past. He didn't need to. The truth of it lived in how he spoke, not what he revealed. When he finished, no one clapped. They didn't rush to fill the space. They sat with it, letting it settle into places long left untouched. Mara nodded once, deeply. "Thank you," she said, "for reminding us what leadership actually looks like." The forum dissolved slowly, conversations blooming in clusters, not driven by hierarchy but curiosity. People lingered. Questions were asked without defensiveness. Apologies surfaced where none had been expected. Evan slipped away before anyone could corner him. He moved back toward the service corridor, the familiar hum welcoming him. His cart waited where he'd left it. He rested a hand on the handle, grounding himself in the ordinary. Later that night, as he wiped down a quiet hallway, he felt something close to peace. Not because he'd been seen, but because the seeing hadn't taken anything from him. At home, Noah was asleep. Homework neatly stacked, a drawing taped crookedly to the fridge. Evan traced the lines with his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring consequences, new expectations, maybe even new paths. But tonight, the building behind him and the life ahead of him felt aligned in a way he hadn't felt in years. The shift was no longer coming. It had already arrived. The morning after the form arrived quietly, without ceremony, as if the building itself needed rest. Evan woke before his alarm, the gray light just beginning to filter through the blinds. Noah slept, curled on his side, one arm flung across the pillow like he was guarding it. Evan watched him for a moment longer than usual, then moved through the routine he knew by heart. Coffee. Lunch packed. A note slipped into the bag reminding Noah about soccer practice. The small axe felt heavier now, not because of the night before, but because of what it had set in motion. Visibility had a weight. He felt it settle between his shoulders as he buttoned his jacket. At school, drop-off, a parent he barely knew smiled and said, "I saw the video." Evan nodded, polite, non-committal. He waited until Noah disappeared inside before letting the breath out. The building greeted him differently that night. Not with attention, he could handle that, but with space. Doors held open. Conversations paused, then continued with a new ease. No one asked him to speak. No one asked him to explain. The absence of pressure felt deliberate, like restraint learned the hard way. He pushed his cart down the familiar corridor, the hum of vents steady and reassuring. Work had always been his anchor. It still was. Midway through the shift, Mara found him where power rarely went, near the loading dock, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She didn't startle him. She'd learned that part too. "I won't keep you," she said. "I just wanted to say, I'm adjusting expectations. For everyone, including myself." He considered her, then nodded. "That's work," he said. "It doesn't finish all at once." She smiled faintly. "No, it doesn't." They stood there a moment, two people stripped of roles by the simplicity of the space. Then she left, footsteps echoing briefly before fading. Evan returned to his cart and continued, the rhythm grounding him again. Later, in the locker room, a co-worker cleared his throat. "So, things changin' for you?" Evan shrugged. "Only if I let them." That answer seemed to settle something. The man nodded and went back to tying his boots. By the end of the shift, exhaustion pressed in, not the sharp kind, but the deep, earned one that came from standing fully in a moment and letting it pass. He clocked out and stepped into the cool air outside, dawn already teasing the horizon. At home, Noah was waiting at the table, cereal half-eaten, eyes bright. "You're early." "Yeah," Evan said. "Figured I'd walk you today." They moved through the neighborhood side by side, hands brushing occasionally, comfortable in the shared silence. At the corner, Noah stopped. "People at school said you were on a screen," he said, careful, testing. Evan knelt to his level. "I helped some people, that's all." Noah thought about that, then nodded. "That's good," he said simply. After the door closed behind his son, Evan stood there a moment longer, listening to the muffled sounds of a school day beginning. He felt something loosen inside him, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. That afternoon, an email arrived on his phone. An offer. Thoughtful, flexible, respectful of boundaries he hadn't even had to state. He read it once, then again. Then he closed it without replying. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table helping with homework, fractions turning into laughter when Noah made up his own rules. The world outside could wait. When night came, Evan stood by the window, city lights blinking on one by one. Somewhere in that skyline was a building, learning how to see its people differently. Somewhere else, a little girl was breathing easier. Somewhere closer, a boy slept, knowing his father would show up in the morning. He didn't need more than that. The future would ask its questions soon enough. For now, he let the quiet answer back. The night settled in gently, the way it did when nothing urgent was demanding attention. Evan stood at the sink, rinsing a plate Noah had forgotten to scrape, listening to the low murmur of the city through the open window. Sirens drifted somewhere far off, then faded. Life continues, indifferent and steady. He dried his hands and moved into the living room, where Noah's backpack rested by the door, already packed for tomorrow. Soccer cleats stuck out at an odd angle. Evan nudged them back inside with his foot and smiled. Small order restored. For the first time in days, his phone sat untouched on the table. No buzzing, no waiting. He picked it up anyway and scrolled through messages he hadn't answered. Gratitude, curiosity, offers wrapped carefully in respect. He didn't feel pressured anymore. That was new. He thought back to the atrium, the way silence had carried more weight than applause, how power had stepped down instead of tightening its grip. He hadn't planned any of it. He just responded the way he always did when fear showed up, calmly, completely, without asking what it would cost later. That was the part people rarely understood. Helping didn't feel heroic. It felt necessary. The building would keep changing without him needing to push. He knew that now. Culture shifted not through declarations but through repeated proof, through people watching what worked and quietly choosing better. Evan turned off the lights and checked on Noah one last time. The boy slept sprawled across the bed, hair damp from a rushed shower, chest rising and falling evenly. Evan rested a hand on his son's shoulder for a brief moment, grounding himself in the simple certainty of that rhythm. Tomorrow would be another workday, floors to clean, hallways to pass through unnoticed, or noticed, if that was how things were now. Either way, he would show up the same. That was the promise he kept. Across the city, in a tower of glass, Mara stood alone in her office, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. The city looked different from this height tonight. Not like something to command, but something to belong to. She reread the forum notes, then closed the file and stared out at the lights, knowing the most important work ahead of her wouldn't come with applause either. Somewhere else, Lila slept with a small balloon animal tucked under her arm, breath slow and even. Her world had widened just enough to feel safe again. These moments would never make headlines. They weren't meant to. They lived in the spaces between power and people, in choices made quietly, repeatedly. Back in his apartment, Evan lay down at last, exhaustion settling deep and clean. He didn't replay the week in his mind. He let it go. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And maybe that was the real justice. Not recognition, not reward, but the quiet correction of a world that had learned too late but not too late enough where real strength lived. If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Fix this if you're so smart. CEO smirked. The single dad didn't even look up. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? You're a night guard, the CEO said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. Not a man who makes requests. Clock out when you're told. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. She let her eyes skate over his uniform like it embarrassed her. One schedule change. If you can't handle nights, I'll replace you by morning. He didn't argue. Hands clasped behind his back, posture unbroken, he answered evenly. Understood, ma'am. That calm should have ended it. Instead, it made her suspicious, like obedience was a mask. What nobody saw was why he'd asked, or the discipline behind that quiet control. Before she followed him after work and discovered what his child needed to survive, she'd already decided he was hiding something. Maine, Celeste Arundel's heels snapped across the marble toward the private elevators. She didn't look back. In her world, people were either assets or noise, and she'd already filed the night guard under noise. Rayan Holt waited until the elevator swallowed her. Only then did he release a measured breath, as if venting pressure from a sealed valve. His fingers brushed the cracked edge of his badge holder, an unconscious check that he still belonged here. The reception staff pretended to focus on their screens, but he felt their glances anyway, quick and guilty. Gideon Marr, the shift supervisor, hovered by the security office door with a clipboard hugged to his chest. Rayan, he said quietly, then hesitated like the next words might cost him. Rayan gave him a small nod. Permission to speak, not permission to pity. She's on one today, Gideon murmured, board's leaning on her. She's taking it out on whoever's closest. The request still stands, Rayan said. Same coverage. I can trade. I just need that one shift moved. Why not HR? Because HR didn't measure a child's oxygen at 2 a.m. Because forms didn't listen for wheezing in the dark. Rayan kept his face still. HR won't move fast enough. Gideon's eyes flicked toward the executive elevators. I could talk to her. No. Firm, immediate, then softer. Don't paint a target on your back. Gideon swallowed. You okay? Rayan nodded once. It meant, I'm used to worse. It meant, I can't afford to break. He stepped into the small glass-walled security room beside the lobby, the place designed to be seen but never respected. Cold coffee, warm electronics, monitors stacked like silent judges. Rayan logged in and began his rounds, camera sweep, door status, patrol timing, working with an efficiency that didn't match the pay grade on his uniform. Upstairs, Celeste entered her corner office, all glass and skyline, and still felt the sting of his calm under her skin. People begged her. People performed fear. That guard had simply endured. She pulled up the roster and stared at his name. Punctual, compliant. No incidents. Ordinary on paper. She hit the intercom. Lena, pull his file. Her assistant's voice came back careful. Which employee? The night guard, Rayan Holt. And what should I flag? Celeste's jaw tightened. Anything missing, she said. Anything that explains why he asked me for a schedule change like it mattered more than his job. Downstairs, evening thinned the suits and thickened the quiet. Rayan kept working, steady as a metronome, but his internal clock ticked louder. Somewhere beyond these walls, Noah would soon need him. A man drifted toward reception, leaning too close to the young receptionist. Rayan rose. "Sir, sign in." "I'm expected. Then you won't mind signing in." The man backed off, irritated, and left. Rayan sat again without pride, only noting the time and the exit. Gideon watched him through the glass, unsettled. "You ever do anything else before this?" he asked, trying to make it a joke. Rayan didn't answer. The past was a locked drawer, and opening it had consequences he couldn't afford. Upstairs, the file arrived, thin, sanitized, a gap where years should have been. Celeste's suspicion hardened into decision. She grabbed her coat. "Tell night security I'm staying late," she said, "and when he clocks out, call me." As her elevator descended, Rayan glanced at the lobby doors, feeling, without knowing why, that the air had changed. Power had turned its eyes toward the place it never looked. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby with a soft chime. Celeste stepped out, coat over one arm, expression neutral. The kind that made people straighten without knowing why. She didn't approach the security room. She drifted near the directory, pretending to read names she already owned. Through the glass, she watched the guard's profile. Still, alert, focused on screens that reflected light on his cheekbones. Rayan felt a pressure behind his eyes, the old instinct that told him he was being studied, measured, followed. His spine stayed straight anyway. The pressure didn't lift when the clock struck midnight. It settled deeper, heavier, like a storm deciding where to break. Rayan logged out exactly on time. Not a second early, not a second late. Routine mattered, precision mattered. He hung his badge inside the locker, not in his pocket, and swapped boots for worn sneakers that knew the shape of long walks. Across the lobby, Celeste pretended to finish an email on her phone while watching his reflection slide across the polished floor. He didn't rush, didn't check messages, didn't linger either. Just moved with intention, like every step had already been planned hours ago. Interesting, she thought. People at the bottom were usually desperate to leave or desperate to please. He was neither. Outside, night air slapped cold against concrete. The city hummed. Traffic breathing, distant sirens, a train crying somewhere underground. Rayan headed toward the bus stop instead of the parking garage. Celeste paused, irritation flashing. No car, no obvious escape. She waited 10 seconds, then followed at a distance that screamed discretion to people who'd never had to practice it. He stopped at the corner bodega, bought a small carton of milk, a banana, nothing else. Counted exact change. Celeste watched him check the receipt before folding it and tucking it into his jacket like proof mattered. Why are you so careful? She wondered. He boarded the bus just as the doors hissed closed. Celeste cursed under her breath and waved down a rideshare, snapping, "Follow that route." Power bought speed but not subtlety. She sat rigid, eyes sharp, tracking intersections, memorizing turns like this was a hostile takeover instead of a man going home. The bus dropped him near a cluster of aging buildings that leaned into each other for support. Laundry hung from balconies. Light flickered unevenly. This wasn't where secrets hid. This was where life scraped by. Rayan crossed the street and paused. Not fear, calculation. Celeste slowed her car instinctively. He glanced left, then right, then adjusted his pace by half a second. Her pulse jumped. He knows, she realized. Or at least, he senses. She stayed back anyway, pride refusing retreat. Inside the building, the stairwell smelled like disinfectant and old paint. Rayan climbed without touching the rail, steps even, breathing controlled. On the third floor, a door opened before he reached it. "Dad?" a small voice called. That stopped Celeste cold. Rayan's shoulders softened instantly, like armor unlocking. "I'm here," he said, low and warm. He stepped inside. The decor closing on a slice of light and the faint sound of medical equipment humming. Celeste stood frozen in the stairwell, anger evaporating into something dangerously close to shame. A child, a real one, not a prop, not a photo on a desk. A voice that sounded thin, careful. She retreated a step, heart knocking harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. Back in the car, she didn't leave right away. She watched the building as if answers might seep through brick. Her phone buzzed. Lena. "His file's clean," her assistant said. "Almost too clean. There's a gap. About 8 years, no explanation." Celeste closed her eyes. "Run it again." "I did. Then dig deeper." When she finally drove away, the city felt different. Smaller, less obedient. Upstairs, Rayan washed his hands for exactly 20 seconds. Noah lay propped on pillows. Tubing taped carefully against his skin, eyes bright despite the machine counting his breaths. Rayan checked the levels, adjusted a dial by millimeters, listened, not just with ears but with memory. "You okay?" Noah asked. "Always," Rayan said. "How's the chest?" "Feels tight." Rayan nodded, already recalculating. He moved with calm certainty, not panic. Panic wasted time. Later, when Noah slept, Rayan sat at the small kitchen table and opened a notebook filled with grids and notes no one at the office would ever understand. Shift swaps, transit timing, medication windows, risk buffers. The schedule change wasn't convenience. It was math, survival math. Across town, Celeste poured herself a drink she didn't finish. She replayed the night guard's posture, the way he'd absorbed humiliation without shrinking. She thought about her own childhood, on tutors, drivers, the luxury of never needing permission to care for someone. She didn't like the mirror forming. The next morning, the lobby buzzed with executive tension. A systems audit had flagged irregularities overnight, minor but embarrassing. Vendors blamed each other. Managers hovered. Rayan stepped into the security room, greeted by Gideon's tight smile. "Big day," Gideon said. Rayan nodded. "I noticed." "By the way," Gideon added, lowering his voice, "people are watching you more closely." Rayan met his eyes. "I know." If you're still here, hit subscribe, because this is the moment where quiet routines start colliding with unchecked power. Upstairs, Celeste stared down at the lobby through glass, watching the night guard take his post like nothing in the world had shifted. She was wrong, and the ground was already moving under her feet. The ground didn't lurch all at once. It crept. Small misalignments. Delays that shouldn't exist. Rayan felt it the moment he logged in. Latency in the camera feeds. A half-second drift between door sensors and their confirmations. To most people, it was nothing. To him, it was a whisper before a collapse. He adjusted his chair, eyes moving across the monitors with slow intent. He didn't touch anything yet. First rule, observe before intervention. Systems told stories if you let them finish speaking. Behind him, the lobby filled with suits and perfume, the low hum of money arriving to work. Gideon leaned in the doorway, tension visible in the way he held his shoulders. "IT's scrambling," Gideon said quietly. "Audit flagged inconsistencies. Execs are already pissed." Rayon nodded once. It's not IT. Gideon blinked. What? The timestamps, Rayon said. They're off, but not randomly. It's a cascade from one node. Gideon stared at him. How do you— Morning? Celeste's voice cut in, sharp as a blade on glass. She stood just outside the security room, arms crossed, expression neutral but eyes alert. She'd dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different now. A tension that hadn't been there before, like curiosity fighting discipline. Explain, she said. Gideon stiffened. Rayon didn't. He turned slightly, careful not to loom, not to challenge. There's a synchronization fault between legacy access controls and the new monitoring layer. Celeste's jaw tightened. That's vendor territory. Yes, Rayon said, but the failure isn't the software, it's the order of operations. Someone forced an update during live hours. Silence followed, not the comfortable kind. Celeste studied him, searching for bravado, for overreach. She found none, just certainty, delivered without ego. You're a night guard, she said again, slower this time. Not an engineer. Rayon met her gaze. I know what my badge says. Gideon swallowed hard. Celeste straightened. Stay in your lane, she said, then turned on her heel. I want this fixed in an hour. As she walked away, irritation flared. At herself, at him, at the fact that his calm unsettled her more now than his request had yesterday. The morning unraveled anyway, doors lagged, elevators paused between floors just long enough to raise blood pressure. Executives complained loudly about incompetence that never touched them directly. Vendors argued in conference rooms with glass walls, hands flying, words useless. Rayon stayed where he was, watching, mapping. He made a single adjustment, so small it barely registered, rerouting a check through a secondary path. The alarms stopped blinking red and settled into yellow. Temporary. Enough to prevent panic. Gideon noticed. What did you just do? Bought time, Rayon said. For who? For them, he said, nodding toward the elevators. And for me. At noon, Celeste convened an emergency briefing in the atrium. Staff gathered on the edges, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. The imbalance was visible. Tailored suits front and center, uniforms pushed outward like furniture. She spoke crisply about temporary disruptions.